Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Talk podcast. My name is Lubumi Alajide, and thank you for being on. So, before I jump into introducing the episode, I just need to thank everyone who listens to this. Throughout this week, I had the opportunity to meet a few people who listen to the podcast, and it has been a wonderful experience. If you listen to this podcast, just know that you're in very good company, and thank you so much for tuning in every week. Okay, so back to the interview I have today. Today we're talking about energy security and energy policy. And we're focusing mainly on developed countries. I know this is a complete change of pace from what we usually talk about. So we're not talking much about Africa or Asia or South America. Today we're talking about Europe and the USA and a little bit about China. So today it's all about what energy policy is and how it plays into energy security of developed nations and how it affects the projects that get approved and lots of different things. So today we're talking with Anna, but I'll let her introduce herself in a bit. So I won't hold you up for too long. Thank you for being back this week and enjoy my conversation with Anna Mikulska.
My name is Anna Mikulska, and I work as a fellow at the Baker Institute for Public Policy at Rice University, and also as a senior fellow at Kleinman Center for Energy Policy at University of Pennsylvania. And my background is in law and political science, and within the energy policy spectrum, I very much look at the issues from that perspective, which basically includes geopolitics and market movements, as well as governments' reactions or governments' policies that determine energy policy and, in a way, also energy market.
Okay. So, being a lawyer as your base profession, did you start out with energy policy or did you go from public policy and kind of venture into it? How did you find yourself in the energy space?
So I have never actually practiced law. So I finished law school and I moved into international relations and later into comparative politics. So I'm coming from that kind of background of understanding how government works, why they do things they do in terms of policies, and also how elections influence our world. So in that way, I kind of very much look into energy policy, including those considerations. So I usually look at, how policies are set up, but also why potentially are they set up in a way, given the government's inclinations, electoral issues or electoral motivations, and so on.
Okay. So my background is in engineering, and I don't know if you've met some engineers while in the universities you attended, but they're not very good with energy policy conversations or policy conversations to begin with. So during my undergraduate degree, I really struggled with this part of the energy sector because teachers don't really want to talk about it; they rather deal with theories. But after I graduated, this was a really eye-opening thing for me because I just realized how much of an impact it plays about the governments and about how many the projects get deployed and everything. So, as an introduction to my audience to get them excited about what how important policy is, and especially energy policy, could you just give a brief uh, maybe a definition if you're teaching a class about energy policy 101.
Well, kind of to start and kind of to relate to your questions about engineers, I actually have had a lot of engineers in my classes here at the University of Pennsylvania. When I teach introduction to energy policy. And I find that actually they quite enlightening. So having a class that consists often of engineers and lawyers or law students, business students, environmental studies students, it's actually quite an interesting experience. And just as my students, I hope, learn from me, they also learn from each other. So I actually really, really always enjoy the mix of students, and engineers are actually quite an important part of that mix. But getting to your questions specifically, so energy policies are basically the laws and regulations, or even the direction of policies that the government is implementing in order to ensure that a country has sustainable energy access and can develop according to, can develop sustainably and can develop well. And that includes, of course, especially economic development. We all know that in order to develop, energy is paramount for any type of countries. And without access to sustained energy and cheap or relatively cheap, affordable energy. So without access to affordable energy, countries will be having issues developing well and economically and providing the best environment for their populations.
Okay, so I just want to dive a bit deeper into this and really go into real life situations where energy policy plays a role. So now talking about two things that you've written about quite a lot actually in your recent publications. That is the Russian gas pipeline, the Nord Stream 2, and also a lot about coal. So first talking about the pipeline. Could you just give like a little bit of background information about about the pipeline so we can jump into it to see the role the policy plays and policy has played so far in the development of this project in particular?
Sure. So Nord Stream 2 pipeline is a pipeline that's in the process of being built, and it's supposed to bring approximately 55 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually from Russia to Europe. And the pipeline runs under the Baltic Sea and delivers gas directly to Germany. Now, this is Nord Stream 2 for a reason. There's already a pipeline or a set of two pipelines actually running under the Baltic Sea and already bringing 55 billion cubic meters in annual capacity of gas from Russia to Germany. This is an additional project which would basically double that capacity to 110 BCM of Russian gas. The pipeline is very interesting because it's also from policy perspective, because it's actually quite contentious, if not really even the most contentious pipeline in Europe for sure at this moment. So there is this disagreement between Russia and a lot of or at least several European countries, specifically within the regions of Central and Eastern Europe, with Russia arguing that this pipeline is supposed to provide energy security to Europe in general, and it's only really an economic endeavor, whereas the Central European countries like Poland or the Baltic countries like Lithuania, Latvia, they argue that this is more of a geopolitical project that is geared towards making Europe more dependent on Russia for natural gas. Now, the interesting part about this pipeline is that it's not really thought to provide more gas, to bring in more gas to Europe. In a way, it's more of a replacement for Ukrainian transit. So basically, until now, majority of Russian gas that would go to Europe would flow through Ukraine. However, there has been disagreements between Ukraine and Russia, mostly because of pricing of natural gas or unpaid debt by the Ukraine. And those disagreements have fueled several actually times when gas that would flow to Europe was cut off. And on the basis of those gas cutoffs, Russia has been arguing that Ukraine is not a reliable transit country, and therefore Russia needs another way to bring in natural gas to Europe. So basically circumvent Ukraine. And that could happen to a good degree if Nord Stream 2 is built, or when Nord Stream 2 is built. And Russia says it's economic only, and there's a lot of countries in Western Europe, in particular Germany, but also others like France or Netherlands, which where companies of those countries have been engaged actually in Nord Stream project, have been actually have owned some of the Nord Stream, the original Nord Stream pipeline project, and now have financed the Nord Stream 2 project. So they argue that it's just economic. We just need a secure route. So this is this whole disagreement that's going on, and now the idea is, well, what can we do to make sure that energy security of European countries is being served? Is it enough to have a new route and the same supplier, Russia, or do we need to diversify suppliers, or do we need to diversify and stop that pipeline from being completed, like several Central and Eastern European countries are arguing? So it's, in a way, it's almost a policy matter and the different policies are kind of proposed by different countries within Europe as to what to do with the pipeline.
The thing I really like about what you've written so far about this particular project is how complex it gets very quickly, because you have one side arguing that this is mainly for the economic benefits, which is to some degree true, but there's also a reverse side of it that gives them a bit more political control, because they basically have a monopoly over the gas markets in Europe, and the projects just allowed them to have an even stronger hold into the market. But as you mentioned about the diversification that other countries are looking forward to, so now there is the option of buying LNG from, let's say, the USA or countries like Qatar, and this is really putting a different kind of pressure in terms of pricing for, especially the Russian gas, and the justification on why this project needs to be built as well.
Right. So you're right. The LNG, the entrance, or the start of importing LNG, particularly in Central and Eastern Europe, has been actually quite important, also for Nord Stream 2 and generally for Russian gas deliveries. So when you actually if you look at the contracts that Russia would have with different countries in Europe, the pricing would differ. And the interesting part is that the pricing of gas that would be delivered from Russia would be actually higher for countries in Eastern Europe or Central Europe, and lower for countries further out, which kind of really doesn't make sense economically at the first sight, because, well, with the Western Europe is further out and should be paying more, since there is the transit additional transit fees. And this hasn't been the case because Russia has been a very powerful and sometimes even has been in monopolist position in the Central and Eastern European markets. Therefore, it was as this dominant supplier could actually dictate higher prices, whereas it couldn't do it in further out in Germany or other countries because those countries had also access to other sources of gas. So it had to play by more of a diverse market rules. Now, with the advent of LNG, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, with LNG terminals in Poland and Lithuania, you see this changing because now Russian gas has to compete at the very least with the prices of LNG that could be delivered to Poland or Lithuania. So, and therefore, you will see that Poland, for example, has already signed several large contracts with U.S. LNG providers, and has been actually arguing that, or that has been saying that the LNG that they've contracted from in 2020s is actually approximately 25% cheaper than the gas that Poland is now buying still from Russia on the basis of contract of the long-term contract that is about to expire in 2022. So that's when you see the markets the market position, the strong market position that Russia had, and was able to dictate really much higher prices. With LNG now you have at the very least the ceiling for the prices that Russia could dictate, and the fact that Russia now is going to have to behave in a different manner, will have to compete for markets. So that's
That's
kind of
very
the
interesting.
market, option that LNG has actually provided. Now, how much of a game changer this is going to be doesn't only depend on what capacity countries have to import, meaning that what capacity terminals there are and so on, but also there needs to be a much more expansive network of pipelines within the region. So when you look at the Western and Eastern Europe, you look at the map with pipelines, you see how much more of a pipeline interconnections and so on between the countries are in the West, and this is not the case in the Central and Eastern Europe. So if this has to also develop, so that gas that Poland, for example, or Lithuania imports as LNG can be later distributed to other countries, and then you will actually have Russia compete for the market.
So earlier this year, I was listening to this panel discussion about a certain energy outlook by the CSIS, and there was this analogy given about comparing all markets to the natural gas markets, and what the panelists said was that the oil market is kind of like speed dating because oil is always in transit. You have oil tankers around the world, and there's such complicated logistical frameworks that can get oil to anywhere it needs. So oil is always going to be sold regardless of where it is at the point in time. But the problem with natural gas is it's more like a long-term marriage commitment because if the pipeline is going towards you, then the natural gas will probably be flowing continuously. So it's like I trust you to keep providing this, and I trust you to keep paying.
Right.
So having LNG terminals is a real game changer because it really forces uh it's like going to force Russia to be more competitive in terms of the supply of natural gas, or it's going to force them to completely lose that market control. So that's going to be very interesting to see. And going more into energy policy, energy security, as you mentioned, um, complicated geopolitical issues like these is why many countries in the world, many European countries even, still rely on coal, for instance. So because they don't want to have most of their energy sources coming from other people that they can't control, so they have to go for something that's more locally sourced. And since coal is the most widely available energy resource, arguably in the world, so they have more of an incentive to use coal, even now that the uh, the energy climate or the actual climate is a
Right.
bit more against coal. So can you just speak a bit about that and what's really driving this use of coal still in the present day?
Right. So there is several issues, right, that come in play here. Well, first, it's the access, and access is crucial, especially as you mentioned, because of the issues of energy security. If you do have domestically available energy source, this source of energy is safer in terms of ability of you delivering to to use it than any imported source, right? So that's one. The second one is also it's also a price. Coal is generally just cheaper than any other, or not the natural gas or oil if you want to use it. Although it's not usually the case, but generally, so what you end up having is this idea of security supply when you have availability at affordable price, which is very important. Now, in addition, for actually, developing countries, coal is also very labor intensive, and in developing world, labor is generally cheap. So that kind of really become, with a booming population, it is another incentive there for thinking at the very least about coal. So that being said, coal has a lot of downfalls, and one of them is, of course, its impact on our environment as a CO2 emission producer. Oftentimes, governments have to look at what's at stake. So, oftentimes, countries which will still want to still rely on coal, they will have to do something about it. For example, like China, because you actually have smoke in the big cities, and that's what's affecting the population. In developing world, you need affordable and secure source of energy for any country to develop, and the developing world is the one that's going to develop the fastest, that will need a lot of energy, especially when it transitions from agricultural to industry-based society. And that's, if energy is not affordable, if energy cannot be accessed, then this growth will be hindered. On top of this, when you think about it, WHO basically reports that 3 billion people use fire and simple stoves that are fired by kerosene, biomass, and directly by coal, and pose serious danger to their lives and health. In that way, when you think about it, the 3 billion of population would probably prefer still coal generated electricity, right? And potentially they could not afford paying for more expensive electricity. So it all depends on what can be done. In the developed world, population and governments are, first of all, they were better off, and in many ways the policies can drive coal out. And that's what you can see, for example, in Europe, right? So even though coal could be the cheaper option than natural gas in majority of instances, you still see coal being driven out by gas or renewable power, because the policy that EU has enacted provide for incentives to get rid of the coal, which emits a lot of CO2, and bring in less CO2 emitting resources. But you have to understand that this can be done only if actually the societies that can afford it. And it is more likely than societies in the West can afford it than societies within the developing world. And that includes China, it includes India, and it includes Southeast Asia, it includes Africa. A coal-generated electricity might be an improvement over open fire or biomass used in simple stove that actually affects their health, and they might be willing to switch to coal because of that. But it's also not only in the developing countries where we see the issue of affordability. So when you actually look, for example, at France and the Yellow Jackets protests, well, the protests, even though it hasn't been, specifically over environment or climate change, it has been sparked by high prices of energy, um, by the segment of French population that has problems of affording more expensive energy. And that so this kind of affordability issue translates through the developing world, but also through the developed world. And policies in all the will have to underscore, or will have to understand these relationships, and will be in many ways driven by those issues. um, so for example, in the US, this is very different because coal is being pushed out by very cheap gas, but it's market based. It's not as much policy based as it is market based. Had the Clean Power Plan been in force, you would see probably just somewhat faster exit of coal. But even without the Clean Power Plan being enforced, the coal is exiting because of market, market related factors, which is basically price. This is, however, not the case in most of other countries, and that's why you see the exit of coal in Europe based predominantly on policy, and then in other countries, it's still, we have to see how these policies will, look into whether or not and how to constrain coal.
Hmm. This is a very interesting part of the conversation, because now we're talking about this indirect cause and effect between how one part affects the other, and this really brings about different kind of conversations. But I just want to focus right now on what you just said about the market determining and about policy determining. So right now, which do you think has more of an impact? Like, I don't know, because the things important to the government body and things that are important to the citizens oftentimes are not the same things. So in terms of the energy transition right now, in just the developed countries, which has more of an impact? Is it the climate change and related policies, or is it mostly about energy security and and sensible pricing?
Well, again, I think it will end up being dependent on the country. So you can talk about general aspects, and you can see definitely that the policy in the developed world definitely, affects the energy use and what type of energy you're using and so on. And that policy, particularly within the EU, is based on climate change considerations. This is less. It is less so in the US. Um, as I've mentioned, the Clean Power Plan has not been really enforced, hasn't been implemented. So, and however, you see exit of coal because of mostly market driven, because the exit of coal is mostly market driven. Now, and energy security will always play a role, and oftentimes it will play a role. Specifically, it's going to be different for different countries. So different countries have just different, they have different resource endowment. They are situated differently. So do they have access to the shoreline, or they don't? Because if they don't, they cannot have their own LNG import terminal, and in that way they again are constrained to receiving gas, for example, through a third country. Is that country a large country? Is that country an ally, and so on? All this is gonna matter. The other things that are gonna matter is of course passed. So, being from Poland, I have a good kind of, I hope to have a good understanding of the situation there. Uh, but what you see is that coal is really big there. Our coal has been part of the economy for decades, even though now the production decreased significantly, and you see that the use has decreased. It's still a very big portion of a Polish energy generation, particularly electricity generation, and it's very hard to get rid of it, despite the fact that EU policies drive Poland to kind of to reduce the use of coal. But there are domestic factors there, right? So you have an industry that it's a large industry. It's actually it's within a very small portion. So it's located within a relatively small portion of the country, where you end up actually having a lot of population depending on coal industry, a lot of population that's concentrated and also has quite a large electoral power. So, for 460 seats, 100 seats in the Polish parliament, the lower chamber of the parliament are actually come from the coal producing or hard coal producing regions. And those regions are actually quite also evenly distributed between the different, competing parties. So now you have close elections, large number of seats, and coal-dependent economy. Well, when you think about it, each and single party that runs for, in elections will have to consider it. And abandoning coal will have electoral consequences, right? So all these things beside energy policy that's set up by the EU, aside of international agreements, you will have to consider electoral consequences in Poland as well, and you will have to also consider issues of energy security. So when you think about it, when most of Polish natural gas is being imported, and for now a lot of it is being imported from Russia, getting rid of coal creates additional dependence, most likely on that gas, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now you introduce even greater dependency on foreign sources, supply of sources. And it can be a concern about Russia not playing by market rules, trying to use its dominance geopolitically, but also it can be concern over the markets. What if the prices of natural gas will just spike? Well, if you are bringing in a lot of LNG and at some point the prices spike, and you are actually dependent on it, this will impact your economy. So again, it's a lot of concerns about energy security, electoral issues, and so on, and that's why you will end up seeing that different countries, even when they have similar goals, for example, set up by the EU, will be implementing or will be reacting to CO2 emissions, use of coal differently, and it's going to be based on on their domestic situation with respect to energy and energy resources.
Okay, so this is a part I don't imagine myself saying this often, but this is what I feel sorry for some politicians sometimes when they have to condense complex conversations like this into simple digestible talking points so people can hear it and just immediately understand and go to the polls and vote for them, because that is one of the biggest challenges that people face, is communicating the complexity of energy policy, especially in terms of the climate change movement that's going on, and to be factual and all the while be impactful at the same time. And most people don't do very well. I don't think that anybody, as far as politicians are concerned, has really found the right balance in communicating these things and worrying about winning the next elections and all this. So it can get very, very complicated. As going back to what you said earlier about the effects of energy policy or about climate change is not something you see very evidently unless you see something actually burning and then it registers in your brain that okay, this might be bad because I can see smoke. But that's really not the point. CO2 is largely invisible, but the effect is accumulative. So that really makes it a very difficult points to communicate. And you've written, especially in one of your articles, Think Globally, Act Locally, and Think Globally Again, that there is this larger cause and effect that even our actions tend to put on the environment. So, as we're talking about the use of coal, for instance, the fact is that we can't stop using coal because large industries are formed around it and so many people depend on it. And one country that I know in particular in Africa that has this problem is some South African countries like South Africa and Botswana. They have economies largely driven by coal. Many people are employed by coal companies, and it's very hard to tell them that okay, we're trying to save the environment, we need to stop producing coal
Right.
now, and your already sparse energy access would get even more expensive. That is a very quick way to lose an election and and probably lose a few more things. So communicating these things, working so long in energy policy and public policy, how do you, or if you've been in a conversation where you've had to start up and communicate complex things in a very digestible manner, how do you go about that? Because that is probably the most difficult part and the most challenging part so far that many people are finding right now in the past few years.
Mhm. I mean, that's exactly it. It's extremely hard, and it hasn't been really that successful. I don't think I'm. It's. I mean, when you think about it, developed world has had problems communicating or setting up communicating channels with the developing world on how things should proceed. So one important thing that has been set up during the COP in Paris is that the developed world could contribute, you know, financially to energy transition in the developing world, because that's in many ways a problem, right? So how do you ask a country that's with a very low level of development, where the with poor population, how do you ask them to stop using an energy source that could get them out of this low, and could increase the or could push them into the more developed state? How do you ask them to stop? uh, what do you do in exchange? And I think we are really struggling with that. So it's great that the developed world and the populations in the developed world, which are generally wealthier, um, are thinking about how they can be part of fixing our addiction to carbon, or how can we decrease the CO2 emissions. But the fact that we going to do this doesn't mean that people in other portions of the world will. So and when you look at the projections of growth in terms of energy use, it's not the developed world that's leading. It's the developing world. It's predominantly for the next 2 decades. It's gonna be, India, China, generally Southeast Asia. Later on, you will enter also Africa and so on. So when you think about it, that we it's very important that we commit to curbing CO2 emissions in the developed world. However, when you see all that growth happening in the developing world, with the developed world kind of staying at the same where it is right now, well, then you obviously need to do something about that additional energy that's going to be used there. Because for now, when you look at the, for example, for coal and the demand and consumption, you pretty much you look at IEA, EIA, the BP outlooks. 20 years from now, all these outlooks generally agree that we're going to use the same amount of coal that we are using now. Well, that's kind of depressing because it means that, we pretty much are standing in one spot, and we're still going to be produce the same amount of CO2 unless something is done. And what needs to be done is not within the developed world, because 20 years from now, that the predictions for the amount of coal that we are going to be using already includes the commitment of the developed world to cutting on CO2 emissions. It's in the developing world where we need to do something, and I don't think we have figured out what. So we are talking about, of course, renewables. The issue of renewables is that yes, we can we can put them out there. We in, for example, Africa has a great amount of sunshine, for example, right? So we could think about solar, but we're still not at the stage yet that we can use renewables and not exclusively renewables and not experience issues of intermittency. And when you think about it, yes, these renewables will be great for the populations living there, which has no access for now to electricity, but then now they will, and they won't mind that intermittency in a way. Maybe they will have, small batteries or so on. And this is fine on a smaller basis, but this is not fine, for example, for industry development. And when you think about it, in these countries, what you want in order for them to develop economically, they have to build those industries of different, be it just typical, or more typical industry, but also tech industry. When you think about how much energy those servers need to run, well, and those servers need this energy all the time. Well, this becomes an issue, right, for developing those industries in the developing world if it experiences issues of intermittency. So what's the base power, what's the base load that would allow those countries not only to have electricity but have reliable electricity, and that provides basis of growth? It can be nuclear, it could be coal, it could be natural gas. How we set it up and how we encourage those countries to use potentially the least CO2 emitting industry. On top of that, whenever I teach my classes, I always ask at the very beginning, what is the climate policy about? And a lot of time, the answer I get, which actually you can see this oftentimes in the media, the answers get, well, we have to get rid of fossil fuels. But this is not a goal of climate policy or climate action. The goal of climate action is getting rid of emissions. And this can imply getting rid of fossil fuels, but it also implies other actions that could and should be potentially taken, especially in the view that we are still predicting use of fossil fuels 20 years from now. So what can that be? It can be, carbon CO2 sequestrations, carbon capture and storage, maybe, and different technologies that not only provide alternative to fuels, alternative to fossil fuels, but also ways to get rid of those emissions that fossil fuels will produce. Kind of saying that, we just need to get rid of fossil fuels. We're not going to worry about the emissions that they're producing because we don't want to encourage them, misses the fact that it may not be a realistic option to get rid of fossil fuels. So in many ways, it's. I think the important things are to know what the goal is, be realistic about what can be accomplished, at least under current state of affairs, without a technological breakthrough that could allow us, for example, to use renewables, store them in an easy and relatively cheap way, and think about where the increase of energy use or energy consumption occurs, because that's where you definitely need to focus what you need to target in order to reach your goals. If you only target on countries, within the developed world, we might achieve a lot. We might cut our use of coal, and we will, because we can often afford it, or like in the US, the market also supports it. But then again, what does it mean if we do not address those issues in the developing world, or for example, in Asia or so on? It happen, if we stop using coal or oil, for that matter, what will happen is the prices are potentially going to drop. So we are now using more expensive, whatever it is, what is a substitute for coal. The prices of coal are dropping because the demand is not there. So what it will do to the demand in those countries that are still using coal? Well, they'll bring this demand up, because now coal is cheaper, right, more affordable, and can compete even better with natural gas or renewables or so on. So we can still feel good about ourselves, but in a way are not really fixing the problem, or in a way we almost subsidizing the use of coal or other fossil fuels elsewhere. And that's why what I talk in my article about is to make sure that we are considering all the things that happen, I mean, all the that we are considering all the consequences of our behavior, and that without it, we actually might not achieve, and what our goals are, and or even might hurt our goals, the ability of our goals to be achieved. So I think that's very important, to have a global understanding of what's happening, right? So in many ways, I am optimistic about the future and the actually part that the developing world can play. We know the idea of leapfrogging, where countries have effectively, leapfrog over an old technology. And one thing that comes to mind right away is phones, right? In many parts of the world, have never had a landline, but they do use cell phones. So this idea of leapfrogging, or that it works. It can be done under specific condition. What allowed that leapfrogging is technology. And I think in many ways, the way that the developed and the developing world can work together is research and development. Making sure that we actually push for progress in different types of the technology, and advancement in different type of technology. It can and should be renewable, nuclear, CO2 capture, all of the above. We should not constrain ourselves to one solution, because pour all the possible resources into one solution, because we might be missing something otherwise. That's why the way we understand the world, the way we should look for solution for the climate action, for our use of energy, should be the broadest possible. That means in terms of looking at different energy sources, looking at different needs. Not only have the centers of research within the developed world, but also within the developing world. And that's where the developed world can help. So when you think about resources that can be brought into the developing world for research and development, for funding researchers, for bringing them, to the developed world, or and then back into the, making sure that the developing world is accessing those technologies and so on. I think there is a very, very big potential in making sure that this is happening. So we find solutions that not only gonna, reflect what we want, but also gonna reflect what others want. what others need. And in that way, all of us can actually commit to a goal. Because if we are not going to, use tools that are compatible with other countries' needs, well, that there is a very big chance that those countries end up not committing effectively to the goals of climate change, CO2 emission reduction, and so on. So that's I think very important, especially at the time. I mean, especially that when you look at international arena, there is really no one international force that can enforce any type of international agreements. So, all the agreements, including COP agreement, are based on countries' will to introduce the changes. If the will is lacking for any type of reasons, electoral reasons, energy security reasons, pricing reasons, nothing is gonna end up happening. Only if that will is there can we see the progress, and can we see actually the commitment that's spelled out in the international agreements going forward effectively.
Now, I hope you enjoyed the conversation we just listened to with Anna, and it has been a nice change of pace. So I need to correct myself. In the intro, I noticed that I said developed countries, and I should have said North America instead of just saying the USA. So any Canadians listening, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave you guys out. So so now we understand a little bit more about energy policy and energy security and how it differs from the perspective or the approaches taken in developing countries like the ones in Africa and Asia and South America. And it really goes to show that if this is where the rest of the communities, developing communities, are moving towards, then they need to, I don't know. I just think that developing countries need to find different routes to solve their problems, because if we just take conventional working models, it's not going to end up so well, especially with the climate change and everything that has to do with that. And the fact is, it's going to affect people in poor regions and developing countries more than it would affect people who have the infrastructure and the money, quite frankly, to deal with simple things like drought is something that it can happen in a city in America and it's just a minor inconvenience. But if it happens in a village somewhere in Nigeria, for instance, then people die. So it just goes to show the different ways that challenges are being faced and how challenges are being handled. And it's important to get a wide scope of different approaches to these things, to understand that it's a great big world. Different people are going through the same challenges, and they're fixing them or attempting to fix them in different ways. So thank you for listening to this episode. It was a pretty long one. It's kind of nice to go back to long episodes. So the next episode is going to be a bonus episode, and we have a lot of announcements for the podcast. So I'm going to be back with Jennifer talking about a lot of things. So I hope you're there, and it's going to be a very interesting one, because a lot of exciting stuff has been happening the past few weeks, and I can't wait to tell you guys about everything. So I look forward to seeing you guys next week and having another insightful conversation about energy. And this has been your host, Lubin Malajide, signing off. Have a wonderful week, you guys.